Hi, I'm Mark Roach. I wanted to talk about complex PTSD today. I have it, and it's plagued me in my life. And I wanted to share what's happened to me in hopes that it might benefit some others, and also selfishly release some of the pent-up and frustrated feelings and misunderstandings that I feel like I've created in my life. So there's a bit of a trigger warning here, because if you have encountered some traumas in your life, I think as you listen to this, there's a chance that you might be brought back to some of those times. And I'm not a doctor, I'm not a counselor. I've worked with many, but I don't want to be held responsible for creating a situation that is harmful to you or to anyone. So that said, let me tell you a little bit more about my story. Complex PTSD is a different experience than PTSD. Post-traumatic stress disorder occurs when you have a trauma in your life. And if you have one incident, and as I understand it, of course I'm not a doctor or a therapist, but as I understand it, people that have PTSD usually have one event that they can go back to in their life that caused them specific trauma and recurring events that prohibit them from living freely in their life. And that one event is usually known or discovered at some point in time. It may have been blocked for a period of time and then come to light, and people usually understand that there was an incident that occurred that caused them to have a specific fear or something that's holding them back in life. Complex PTSD, on the other hand, is something that is often, like for me, it's something that I can relate back and see patterns back in my childhood that have recurred over and over and over and over again. And that's why it's called complex, is because the trauma creates these patterns that repeat in your life, and they repeat over and over and over again. And it's only after you do a lot of soul searching, or you run into some bad outcomes that are created from those patterns, that you are led to really see and face those things in your life. And so anyway, that's my experience with complex PTSD, is this repetition and seeing patterns that have followed me throughout my childhood into my teenage years, and then have repeated into my later years in life, or midlife now. My background with PTSD and complex PTSD, wow. Well, everything exploded about 10 years ago in my life. And that wasn't like it was the first crisis in my life, but I think when I turned 40, someone accused me of having a middle-aged crisis, and I responded without even thinking that my whole life had been a crisis, and this was nothing new. So if that is something that you're experiencing, I'm sorry, but I can give you some hope that there are some therapies and some technology that's available today, and some groups and support to help you manage the symptoms and recover. But to be more specific about where my patterns began in early childhood, my father was in law enforcement, and our family was threatened by organized crime, and that created some fear in my home. And I am a very sensitive person. I picked up on that from my father, and of course my mother was scared. Then also I was molested by a neighborhood boy who also had my same first name, and so for years we never spoke of that incident. and mention of his name, which happened to also be my name, sent terror through my system. And I had been accused of being shy or having a self-esteem problem, when in fact it was really simply the trigger of that incident that stuck with me up into my 30s and 40s. And I didn't realize that it was the incident that had really haunted me into my 50s. The organized crime threat that I encountered when I was also around 5 years old led me to have some very antisocial feelings, because my father was ostracized in the small town that we lived because, well, there has to be some acceptance of these gray areas in life, and it caused him a lot of stress to turn a blind eye to some of the inner workings of the businesses. And I guess there was some drugs being moved through the area. So the transportation and some of the threats that the cartel and the system that was supporting the local economy around this small town were something that he had trouble accepting. He was a very religious, he was a former, he was a Marine, and this just flew in the face of the values that he'd been raised and the expectations that he had of society. And in fact, I think it crushed him at one time early in his career, when he met with a great deal of success in breaking a big case, which brought attention to our family and some threats. So I carried that on into later life, and I found my home on although I didn't like the violence of football, I was so contrite, had pushed all these emotions and had nowhere to go with them. So football was a great outlet for me. I also lifted weights and became a highly sought after athlete in football, especially, much because of my anger due to this complex PTSD that I had dealt with. But when it came time to go to college and play college football for a major college institution, it crushed me emotionally. I didn't understand it at the time. I didn't like the violence, and I hadn't really dealt with my emotional issues and adjusted. So I drank, and I tried to grab on to things that felt like they were going to support and take care of what had been neglected in my life, but I failed. I failed as a husband and as a father, and even though I went out and I got an engineering degree, and was part of, I had the chance for a lot of success in oil and gas. I kept on performing exceptionally well, and I would always come up short, much because of my inability to have really good friendships with other men in particular, and also to that early childhood experience with organized crime and the businesses that had also had to conform to the organized crime's values or lack thereof, caused me to really have a hard time fitting in with other groups that were built around capitalism and law. My father's extremely strict application or desire to apply law in society and in the church at a really extreme level posed quite a challenge for me, and it still does. So at one time, actually about 3 times when I was around 20 years old, I took on large groups of men, fraternities, when I was a pretty popular person. But there was another side when they came back to me and offered me chances to join their group. It infuriated me, and I would act out. And I'm not going to go into the details of that right now, but I'm not proud of how I handled that. And later in life, when I had success, because I was a good engineer and I was smart, I also cared about people a lot. And I think that this PTSD made me much of who I am, because I do really pick up on what is going on with people and their emotions, and look deeper and maybe deeper than I should into what's happening in others, and can also violate some personal boundaries that others may be carrying with them, that sometimes they're healthy, and then but what I found is that a lot of times there's other people I run into that are just like me, that are really kind of deferring or waiting for the right time to deal with these issues. And I've had some very strong personal relationships, especially 2 long-term relationships with women who had never dealt with their personal traumas and healed completely. So if you find that you're running into some of these patterns that I may have mentioned here about groups and conforming to things that seem to be working for everybody else but have not worked for you yet, there may be some pain and trauma that you've not had a chance to deal with yet. And I think that leads to the next point in this introductory video, that there are some really good resources available today to help you uncover those. And one of the things that really worked for me, for my benefit, and also it destroyed my life more than once, was journaling. And the destruction came whenever others read my journals and were devastated or surprised or triggered at some of the feelings that I was having. And I wasn't blaming those feelings that I was having on my partners or my environment. I was discovering them in these journals with my expressive writing. And although I may have used names and figures of other people that had triggered these feelings that I was having trouble understanding, the reason I was writing was to get it out. And so if you're using journaling, protect that and don't lock it up. Or even online, I had my privacy invaded, where others came and they printed out my journals and shared them with other people. And I would agree, they are sometimes very scary and dark, but that's why we journal. We have to find a way to get this out. And sometimes it doesn't come out of our mouth, it will come out through our writing. And hopefully it doesn't come out as much through your behavior in the rest of your life, and you can deal with it privately or with a professional. Another thing that was very beneficial to me was MDR. And they have a rapid eye movement technique where you work with a therapist who is moving an object that you follow with your eyes back and forth, and you allow yourself to go back into some of the traumatic experiences that you've had and feel the events that caused this trauma. And to my understanding, what this does, it helps your brain, parts that have gotten fixed, that are holding these behavioral patterns that are trapping you in your as you live your life. it allows natural healing to occur as you go back and forth. So these hardened plastic areas in your brain, as you allow yourself to go back to the period where that plasticity occurred, or that cement got laid down in the neurons in your brain, or the synapses, that some natural healing can occur. So I did that, and I knew that that was something that was going to be beneficial to me, and I did it about 7 to 8 years ago. And it's not depending on how many pattern repetitions you've had of your complex PTSD, you could encounter some healing relatively quickly if you have discovered these patterns early in your life. Unfortunately for me, it was later in my life, and I had a lot of layers to heal and to understand, and a lot of devastation had occurred in my life. In fact, another aspect or tool that you can use in healing is fasting. And again, I'm not a doctor, and I think you need to be careful with this, but I do 5-day fasts. I've been doing that for quite some time, but I've experimented, been a semi-pro athlete and an engineer, and having been in the gym working out since I was probably 7 or 8 years old. And I'm 60 now, and I still work out 7 days a week and put in 10 to 15 hours in the gym, and always have. So, but I also have been very cognizant of my diet over the years, and have, going back into my teens, I played with diet to put on weight for one sport, to take it off for another sport. And then also, having done a lot of film and film acting work, and had studied some Meisner methods to create characters or find characters in you, I connect with the physicality of characters, and through that method. And so actually, yes, I have caught myself being a method actor in real life, and using a diet and exercise and basically my physicality to create or tap into characters that I set my sights on. But I think it's it's an interesting process to experiment with, that's very safe as long as you're relatively healthy, and you may need some doctor's guidance. But even a fasting for a day or 16 hours can be beneficial. I've talked to other people who have found their mind really gets clear after some fasting, and your body has a way of naturally healing from these traumas that we encounter. And maybe I'll speak to that more later. I'd love to get some comments from some of you as to what you might be interested in, because I've been studying this stuff for pretty much 45 or 50 years. I knew something was troubling me whenever I was in my teens, and it's taken me my entire life to get to the point that I can speak of it without trembling or feeling in fear, or feeling like some of the situations that I walked into were going to come back on me. Because I was quite exceptional in the work that I did in oil and gas, for example. And I worked around a lot of wealthy and super affluent individuals and powerful individuals, as well as some very powerful organizations, private equity firms, as well as corporations, as well as some very privately held oil and gas companies and software companies. And I ran into problems whenever I wouldn't conform, and whenever they really discovered that although I was a powerful leader, I think it was scary for some of these organizations to see that how vulnerable I was and how I was not going to be the model leader that they might have envisioned, because I just would not conform to the group think and be a joiner. But it made me very independent and made me very complete over a wide range of topics, maybe from law, finance, engineering, which I went to school for, and geoscience. And I even went all over the world teaching many of those things, and helped some major oil and gas service companies develop some software to basically put the entire of those disciplines together and teach workshops and go into oil fields around the world, find their best practices, and then work with their local people in those local cultures, with a few Western Americans around me, to help to optimize their work and workflows. I really enjoyed that exposure to those cultures. It let me compare my experience growing up with some of the rules that I was exposed to the rules that these people lived by. And it gave me a way to compare my humanity with theirs and connect and share something. So it was a very rewarding experience for me. So that's the good news, is that the complex PTSD can create some real challenges in conformed stories that you may have pursued and the limitations that you encounter. But on the flip side, there's some deeply rewarding sides to what it exposes you to in life. And I think one of my disappointments was that I would have a chance to be an artist and tap into that underbelly that I've always longed for, understanding the depth, the fundamentals of humanity, which in a capitalistic and a fast-moving society, people really operate quite effectively on the surface. And of course, there's always that element of the mob or the shadow side that we all have to deal with. And in some cases, we have to tolerate to some degree. So I hope that's helpful to you. I hope that you find this an encouraging video, and that this is not coming off as daunting. I've worked with probably several hundred people personally over the last 20 or 30 years that I've run into who have been dealing with some degree of PTSD or complex PTSD. And I find myself as a handholder for those, someone who understands and is trying to assist others in finding their way. So I hope that you find that this is of benefit to you. And I'll give you one last insight, if you would, and I don't mean that in any arrogant way, but gratitude is an essential key to reaching genuine forgiveness. It's one thing to say I'm sorry to yourself or to someone who you feel has harmed you, but when you find gratitude for the circumstances that you've encountered in your life, and when you learn that there's a level of responsibility that you take that gives you your life back, and at times there's a process that you go through where you feel like you've had things taken from you that you'll never get back. But I'm here to tell you, encourage you, that if you can find gratitude, then you can overcome the anger and the block and obstacles that you're encountering in dealing with your own PTSD or the patterns related to complex PTSD. I'm Mark Roach. I'd appreciate your comments and feedback and suggestions and questions, and I'd love to be part of your journey of healing. All the best.